Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again today to the COPEC Daily Financial Wellness Webcast. We have a great show today that we're going to be working on, and that's how to prepare for Medicaid applications for those of you that might be in that situation where you might be looking at that in the near future for a loved one or even for yourself. Russ, Golowin, our COPEC volunteer elder law attorney, is going to be joining us here in a little bit. Just wanted to go through a little bit of information for us before we get started. And for those of you that have been here, my apologies, but it's always something that we need to go through. So first is myself. I'm Jay Linder, the host of the program today, and I'll be doing most of these programs along with Jerry Snyder. We're both certified financial planners and founders of COPEC back in 2004. And so happy to be here and provide this program to you. Regarding a little bit of disclosure, let's get to that here. So obviously COPEC is a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, but because that we are heavily involved with setting it up and on the board, we also want to make sure that we have some good disclosure regarding the company affiliation, relationships, and also some disclosures from retirement strategies. So we appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you and take a look at that. And if you'd like to either print screen or take a snapshot or go to the copeceducation.org website, and there's another version of this under disclosure at the bottom. And so I'll give you a second to go through this, and feel free to ask any questions if anything is confusing at all. Hopefully that's enough time for you to be able to review that. But again, feel free, if I need to bring that up later, just let me know. But to kind of review what we got going on here, again, COPEC is a nonprofit organization developed in 2004, providing education to the community without any sales or any cost to the community. We have done programs for all different types of companies and universities around Central Ohio. And this is an open platform with no registration required, and anybody can join to give you an opportunity to listen into a number of our topics that we'd like to bring to you on a daily basis. You notice the second line down there, the daily, the financial portal. The Daily Webcast, along with Financial Wellness Fridays and Retirement Decisions, is a program that we make available to the community. And I'm going to go over that in just a little bit, but we really had a lot of questions from the community and attendees from programs about different financial wellness topics that we can bring to the public in general. So we're happy to do that, and hopefully you enjoy these programs every day or whenever you have some that you'd like to listen to. Programming and technology, obviously things may go wrong from time to time dealing with technology these days, but be patient. I'll make sure we get it set up as soon as possible. And if you have questions, feel free to either do the question and answer or the chat box, and we'll make sure we get those questions in either during the first half-hour program or the extended Q&A session from 2:30 to 3. Holidays, we will not be functioning during the holidays, including things like the day after Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, those days. So if you tune in, we probably won't be here. So, and then lastly, share this with others. This is a great program. This is available to anybody, and you can tune in whenever you want. So share it either with coworkers, family, anybody you'd like. We'd love to have them. As far as our experts, you can see on the right side, we have a lot of experts that we bring in to be available to talk with you either during the daily shows or the Financial Wellness Fridays. And you see there we have CFPs, financial counselors, CFPs, members of the Better Business Bureau, home care assistants, and social media experts, lawyers, and even some IT, some keeping kids safe online, things like that. So we got a lot of great programs available during the year. And as we go through, when you go to the COPEC website, I just want to share with you a little bit about the portal. Top left, this is our daily show today. The orange buttons below are our calendars going forward. So if any of those program topics are of interest, make sure you note that on your calendar, and we'd love to have you. Otherwise, just join in every day. We'd love to see you. And so here is an example of a calendar. We're going to be finishing up, obviously, August on Monday, and we'll be going into the September calendar, but you can see that on the website. The middle area is retirement decisions. Those are going to be September 17th. We are going to be converting that over to web-based Zoom meetings similar to this. We do want registration, though. That has to have a little bit of a different organization. So if you're interested in either of those days, just go ahead and register, and we'd love to have you. Then lastly, over here, Financial Wellness Fridays, that is similar to what we do today, but it's really more of an hour-long lecture series. This morning, we had a program, 10 critical aspects of financial wellness. And for those that attended, we appreciate you doing that. And we will have this going every Friday, so feel free to join us anytime. If you're part of a company or organization, department at a university, church, any organization that you'd really like to have us do a special program for your members, associates, employees, just send us a note through this link here. We can set up something and have one of our experts exclusively do one for you. We've been doing that for 16 years, and we're happy to support. And then lastly, if you have personal questions that are unique to you and a little bit more detailed and personal than we can do in this open forum, please either send me a note, send the expert a note, or you can actually schedule a 15-minute consultation. Again, no cost, no marketing, but we can help you out as best as possible to give you direction. Just put a note in the calendar there, and we'll set that up and help you out. So appreciate the chance to do that. And thank you for letting me go through this information. Now, let's go ahead and bring Russ in line with us here, and so we can go ahead and have a conversation. And Russ, your microphone is still, there we go. Great. Hey, we have Russ Golowin, elder law attorney. Russ, thank you so much for joining us today. What are we going to be talking about today? I know we've got how to prepare for Medicaid applications, but tell us a little bit about what that's going to be about.
Well, sure, Jay. I give presentations on long-term care, Medicaid eligibility a lot of times, and those really focus on what are the eligibility requirements from a medical and financial perspective. But I thought today I would actually talk about more practically, what do you want to have gathered and organized ahead of time so that if you do have to apply for Medicaid for yourself or for a loved one, so that you don't have to go scrambling for all sorts of documents and verifications and bank statements. So for our 20 minutes or so that we'll talk, I'll give some examples of the documents that are needed, and also hopefully a few tips that can make that a little bit easier if you do end up having to deal with Jobs and Family Services in a Medicaid application.
Great. And again, just to make sure everybody understands, also, if you have questions, just send those on in. And Russ, you're willing to stay after 2:30 if there's any questions from anybody that you can go through. And for those of you that are attending, you can do those anonymously if you'd like. But just let us know if you have any thoughts or questions. We'd love to help you out. I guess the first thought that I had, Russ, is when would somebody need to apply for like a long-term care Medicaid, situation?
Yeah, what I'm talking about specifically is somebody that needs in-home assisted living or nursing home care. And there's really only about 4 ways to pay for that. Number one is just pay for it out of your pocket until your savings are gone or at the Medicaid eligibility level. Number 2 would be maybe you have some long-term care insurance that can help you pay. 3 is veterans pension, which wartime veterans or surviving spouses of wartime veterans might be eligible for. And then number 4 is Medicaid. And Medicaid is kind of like the last resort. If you've spent your money down and you're not eligible for the other sources and you're down to no money in the bank, Medicaid's what we have to access to get some help there, unless you have family members or loved ones that can pay for your long-term care.
What are the, if you can go into a little bit, what are the financial requirements for Medicaid? Is there any restrictions? How do they look at that?
Yeah, again, in many of my presentations, we focus on that for an hour or even a couple hours because it can get pretty complicated. But for our purposes today, just to keep it very, very simple, and this is oversimplifying it, but for a single person, you have to have $2,000 in countable assets or less. So basically nothing. For a married couple, there's a range of assets that a married couple might be allowed to have, but the absolute maximum is 130,000. So if a married couple has total combined assets of over 130, they're not going to be eligible in most cases. So that's the general range that we're talking about as far as money in the bank or other savings.
Does that grow each year?
Well, it does grow slightly every couple years. That number is adjusted by maybe $1,000 or so. So it doesn't really swing wildly, but yeah, all the Medicaid numbers do periodically change a bit. So you have to kind of keep up on it.
Can you go into a little bit more about, the 5 years you mentioned?
Yeah, many people have heard of a look back period or a penalty period, or just they've heard of 5 years or 3 years in relation to Medicaid. And I guess that's a good point, Jay. There are many myths or misunderstandings about Medicaid out there. So part of the reason why I do enjoy speaking on this topic is even though the eligibility criteria is stringent and sometimes people are not in quite as good of a position as they thought they were, at least we can clear up the misconceptions. Because you'll hear things like, well, if I have to apply for Medicaid, Medicaid's going to just take my home and take it right out from under me and I won't have anywhere to live. But that's not exactly true. There are other myths where if you need Medicaid, you're not eligible for 5 years. Well, that's not necessarily true. The 5-year period is in relation to giving away money. If I'm worried about having to go to a nursing home and I could just give everything to my son, well, that would be pretty easy. Most people would probably do that. So Medicaid came up with rules that say if you give away money or assets or property and it was within 5 years of applying for Medicaid, Medicaid is going to impose a waiting period or an ineligibility period because of those gifts. So part of the concept in pre-planning, or what's actually called 5-year planning, is to maybe create a special type of trust, transfer money into it, and then after 5 years, then that money's safe. The reason it's safe is because it's owned by a trust, an irrevocable trust, not you, and the transfers were made more than 5 years ago. So when you go into Medicaid and apply, they'll ask, have you given away any assets or property within the last 5 years? And if you say yes, there's going to be a penalty period. If you say no, there won't be any period of ineligibility. You'll be eligible right away. But Medicaid has to look at your bank statements and your financial records because they're not just going to take your word for it. They need to see proof that you didn't give away money to become eligible.
So not only are we talking about how to prepare for Medicaid application, meaning it's more imminent, and I am confident that you probably have some programs you're going to be doing on some more advanced pre-planning. So if you know that you're kind of limited in funds, but you're still healthy enough, you might want to start thinking about some of these things farther out so that you can set up this application process ahead of time and make sure you're thinking about those rules way before the physical application time, right?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, this is specifically for people that are maybe worried that they might need some nursing home or assisted living, or for loved ones. But on the other hand, we're kind of just talking about being really organized with our finances. I mean, even if you're the most organized person, you're probably not going to have all of the things I'm going to mention in a minute all together. But just in case we need long-term care in 5 years and 10 years, if we start gathering this together and kind of keeping our eye on what Medicaid might need, it's just going to be a lot easier for you or for whoever's helping you at that point to be able to kind of navigate this Medicaid application or veterans benefits application system. Yeah.
Well, okay, how about this then? How about we get into some, documents and things that Medicaid might be looking for? I know that I think you have some information on that we can maybe share.
I do. I'm going to try to share a slide here. Should be working right now. Is that coming through, Jay?
Yeah, we can see it. Yep.
Okay. All right, so here's a list of 18 different things that might be required when you're going through this Medicaid application. I'll read some of them. Birth certificate, marriage certificate, driver's license, Social Security card, Medicare card, medical insurance cards, proof of your Social Security amount, any pensions, federal income tax returns, prepaid funeral plan if you have one. And by the way, any prepaid funeral plan has to be irrevocable for Medicaid purposes, or the value of that funeral plan is considered cash in the bank. And if you're single, remember that asset limit is $2,000. So if you have a prepaid funeral and it's not irrevocable and it's worth $10,000, you're ineligible for Medicaid. So keep an eye on that. Burial plot deeds, deed to your house. If you sold your house within 5 years of applying for Medicaid, you need to show that closing statement. You need to show where that money from the house was deposited. You got car titles, military discharge paperwork, and then the big issue right here, number 15. You have to, if Medicaid requests it, provide the last 5 years of financial statements for every single account that you owned. So if you have checking, savings, brokerage, annuity, life insurance policies, CDs, maybe you have 5 different checking accounts, that's 60 different monthly statements you might have to provide for each account. So this can be hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents. And if you don't have copies of those statements from 4.5 years ago, well, it's just going to be difficult to gather them because you have to either request them from the bank, dig around to find them in the house. If you have to request them from the bank, sometimes they charge, $7 per statement. It can just get really, really frustrating. So first tip I have is start keeping all of your bank statements and financial statements in order, very organized in a folder or binder, and make sure that you always have 60 months available just in case it's needed.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when we think about applications for Medicaid, you think of something like, underwriting for a loan or some of these other things. I don't want to say it's easier, but it's a lot easier in the sense that there, obviously the first 5, 6, 7 of those, your who you are, your driver's license, those things that are important. But when you do other types of loans and things, you got FICO scores, you've got tax returns, you've got, a lot of those things that they can decipher from there, like what your credit worthiness is or what your income and assets. The interesting thing about this is they have to go through, in essence, a forensic accounting of your life over the past 5 years. They have to go back and say, here's exactly where you moved your money, because they really want to minimize fraud on the system. So if you're not thinking the fact that they're going to do forensic accounting on where every dollar went, then you're going to have a rude awakening, aren't you, when you go through this process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends on the county and it depends on the caseworker, but they're probably going to say, okay, thank you for giving me all these statements, but by the way, there are these withdrawals, cash withdrawals, and there are these checks, and we see the amount of the check, but we don't know where it went. You need to tell us where this $650 cash withdrawal went 4.5 years ago, and you need to tell us what the payments were made to on these 15 checks spread out over the last 5 years. And of course, I don't remember what I ate lunch 2 days ago. So I'm not going to remember what a cash withdrawal was for 2 years ago.
So it's good not to use cash within those 5 years, right?
It is good to not use cash. It's great to use checks. And one of my tips is have those check images printed on the monthly bank statements if you can. Because then when you have the bank statements, you send them in, it's clear right from the statement of what those checks were for. So if it's to the in-home care agency, that's clearly, for my care, there's no problem. If it's for Lowe's, Home Depot, that's not sure. So I want to keep my receipt too. So I can say, well, this $700 was for the generator that we had to buy during the power outage, or this was for tile that we used to fix the bathroom floor.
Right.
Keep receipts, have the copies of the checks printed there, because if you can't prove what a cash withdrawal was for or what a check was sent to, well, then it's going to be presumed to have been a gift. And remember, any gifts during that 5 years, they're going to add them up, and they're going to impose a period of Medicaid ineligibility depending on the amount of those gifts. So it's critical to keep these receipts and be able to show what the money was spent on.
Are they typically pretty liberal? Are they pretty, as far as, maybe dollar amount, or hey, no, I was using it for that, or is it pretty rigid and you have to, look, this was for utilities and this here, like you said, if you can't show that tile went in your bathroom, then they're going to assume, they're going to default that it's not counted?
Well, first of all, it seems that typically the caseworkers aren't really concerned with transactions if they're under $500 or so, sometimes $1,000. And they don't always ask for 5 years of statements. It just takes so much time to go through all that. I think at a minimum, they're typically asking for a year, sometimes 5 years. So you have to plan to be able to submit 5 years.
Yeah.
As far as how stringent they are, in most cases, they've seemed fair to me. Where, such as if I provide, if the check is clearly to Lowe's and I can show a receipt for what it was for, and I have an explanation that, yeah, we needed that generator, I don't usually have any trouble. But if I didn't have a receipt and the check was to, just my son, then I'm getting a little worried because I don't have any proof of what it was for. They're probably going to treat that as a gift.
And I assume when you go in, if you're organized, it's a much easier relationship with those, your counselor, whoever you're working with there, than if you go in and they have to dig for every piece of information. I've always found, like with audits and things like that, if you come in prepared, it definitely makes it easier to go through it.
Absolutely. I mean, if you have all this stuff organized, it'll be much easier for you, much easier for the attorney, much easier for the caseworker. And I do think that you're going to be more likely to receive a good result if it's all presented in an organized fashion than sending in, paperwork in 10 different batches, all mixed up with things missing. I think you're right, Jay.
I know that you mentioned like your bank statement having the checks already on there, things like that. Do you have any other tips that, we can fit into this, short time period that maybe, people can think about as they're going through this?
Right. One thing where my little cursor hit is on the screen, remember, if you had an account and it's been closed, that's still an asset that you owned within the last 5 years. So you have to report it, and then you have to explain to Medicaid that it was closed, which means you have to tell them where the money went. So if you close an account, I would say keep that last statement and write right on it, account closed, balance transferred to checking number 1234. And then it'll be easy for you to remember where it went. And when you provide that to the caseworker, it'll be easy for them to see, okay, well, this account was closed. I see it had a zero balance as of June 28th, and I can see that it went to the other checking account. If you do that, that'll be really nice. A couple other tips I wrote down. I mentioned just keeping a file folder or binder with all the statements in it, real nice, chronologically saved. That'll save you a ton of time. And then finally, two things. If you're interested in learning more or you're concerned about your exposure to the cost of long-term care, I definitely suggest having a consultation with an elder law attorney. They can take you through the Medicaid rules, the veterans benefit rules, if you're a wartime veteran or surviving spouse. They can apply those rules to your situation and tell you this amount of money is subject to loss if you need long-term care. So you'll know where you stand, you'll know how the rules apply to you. Then, if you talk to a certified financial planner or someone that has access to long-term care insurance, they can look at your financial plan and goals, figure out what the cost of a long-term care policy would cost you, explain how that would fit with your general financial planning, and then you can decide whether it makes sense for you to purchase that coverage or not. If you do, then you'll have, a sense of protection that may or may not dovetail with any legal planning or irrevocable trust planning. And if not, if you decide neither of those are for you, well, at least you're informed and you know what's coming and you've made an educated decision. So I think those are some tips that I really do encourage people to kind of be proactive in learning about this and thinking about what might be best for them, instead of just waiting until a healthcare crisis occurs, because when that happens, we're just unable to protect as much as we would if we would have looked a little bit ahead of time.
That's some great information. I'm going to switch this back over so your information's up here. I think you can see that now, right?
Yeah, looks good.
Do you, we're kind of running out of time here. We're going to go ahead and close up here in about 2 minutes. I know what you're saying. If you really want to unwrap this package of conversation, there's so much information inside this, but I think this is really some good, some good examples of really, you cannot just show up and say, you know what, it's time for me. If you're running out of bread, you go get bread. You don't just show up and make this happen. You can, but there's a lot of work that goes into it to make sure you're prepared. Even if you are prepared, to some degree right before the application, it does require you to think ahead as much as possible, to be proactive and put yourself in the best position. Because you talked about, if they exclude certain expenses and things like that, you got to be prepared to private pay even potentially if you're penalized, right? You go through this and you can't explain some of these expenses, you may be penalized for 6 months. Well, how are you going to pay for it? Because you didn't think this stuff through.
Right, and that's one last little tip I was thinking about. Before you file a Medicaid application, you should make sure that person's eligible. So that means you need to know the rules, and you also need to make sure they haven't made any gifts or transfers within the last 5 years, which is sometimes it's really pretty hard to know, but that's why having this financial information available and organized will really make it helpful for your loved ones, so that they can either determine whether to go forward on their own, or if they want to hire an attorney to help them, then they'll be able to give the attorney the information they know to make that informed decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Russ. Amanda, I do see a question and a couple of others here, so we're going to go ahead and get to those questions here in a second. We're going to go ahead and wrap up this portion of the program so that we can get the videotape of this done. Everybody, go ahead and hold on, and we'll get into the question and answer here in just a moment. Russ, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to take just a 2-second break here, and we appreciate everybody tuning in and listening to this program.
Thank you, everybody.